Held in captivity by Hamas for more than 2 years, the 20 living Israeli hostages are finally reunited with their families. Hello, I'm Vicky Young and welcome to Politics Live. Joining me today, Labour MP Emily Darlington, Reform UK's Layla Cunningham and investigative journalist Paul Holden.
The world needs more Trumps.
Donald Trump receives a hero's welcome in the Israeli parliament for securing the release of the remaining Israeli hostages. But will this bring lasting peace to the region? Why did the case against these two men accused of spying for China collapse?
We could be an incredible fighting force if we pulled together.
Keir Starmer campaigning for the Labour leadership back in 2020. But did he and his team play fair? If you've got a view about that story or any other, remember, it's your BBC News, so we want to hear your voice. Get in touch using the details on screen now. Well, as you heard in the headlines, the 20 living hostages who were kidnapped by Hamas have been released to the Israeli authorities. Let's go straight to our Middle East correspondent, Hugo Bachega, who's in Sharm el-Sheikh. And Hugo, just give us a sense of what's been happening this morning.
Well, Vicky, it's been a day of joy, celebration for millions of people across Israel and also for hundreds of Palestinian families. So today, all 20 living hostages that were being held by Hamas in Gaza are now back in Israel, following obviously that ceasefire deal that was agreed last week. Now, Hamas still has to hand over the remains of up to 20 deceased hostages. So the wait continues for the families of these deceased hostages. At the same time, we have seen that Israel has started to release 250 Palestinian prisoners and also 1,700 detainees who had been detained in Gaza were being held by Israel without charge. And we've seen some, scenes of celebration in the occupied West Bank with the buses carrying those Palestinian prisoners who have been freed as part of this deal. Right now, President Trump is addressing the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. He has said that this is a historic dawn of a new Middle East. So again, he's been repeating the idea that this is the beginning of peace in the Middle East. But as we know, this is just the first phase of this 20-point plan that the president announced last month to bring the war in Gaza to an end.
And you are in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh, where there is going to be a gathering of world leaders. Just tell us what is likely to happen there. You've talked about the first step towards peace. As you say, there's a lot further to go, isn't there?
Yeah, so major obstacles remain, and there will be the official signing of this deal, so a victory lap for President Trump. This deal was only made possible because President Trump put pressure not only on Hamas but also in Israel. He has been personally involved in these negotiations. But what happens next? There's no clear timeline for these negotiations, no clear plan. There's only a framework of what should happen next. But those key sticking points remain: the future of Hamas, the scale of the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, and who will govern Gaza. And these are likely to be, very difficult negotiations, very difficult discussions going forward. And again, there's no clear plan in terms of what is going to happen next. The president is going to come here, and again, I think we should expect him to say that this is the beginning of a new Middle East, of peace in the Middle East. But again, major obstacles remain. We're not there yet, but many hope that this will be the beginning of a process, if you like, of trying to solve not only the war in Gaza, but the conflict in this region. And but again, major obstacles and no clear plan in terms of what is going to happen next.
OK, Hugo, thank you very much indeed for bringing us up to date on all of that. Hugo Bachega there in Sharm el-Sheikh. Emily, President Trump, we've seen already being hailed a hero in the Israeli parliament. Is he the hero of the hour?
Look, a deal was never going to be done without the Americans. We've always known that. Didn't matter who the president was going to be. There had to be an American push for the deal. He has come in and done that. I wish he'd done it earlier, but he has come in and done that. So on top of the international efforts that have happened to bring peace in this conflict, we have seen this huge push by Trump and the Americans, and that's what's gotten us to where we are today. I just hope we go further and we actually get to a long-time peace with a two-state solution.
Layla?
I think Trump is a hero, yeah, and it didn't happen under Biden, Emily. It happened under Trump, let's be very clear, and he is a hero, and the world and the Middle East have to thank him. And what this shows is that you stop wars through shows of strength, not virtue signalling and unilaterally recognising Palestine as a state, which actually, as Labour did, which legitimised Hamas. You recognised it without any kind of condition on Hamas to de-arm itself, to recognise Israel as a country. And all those at the negotiating table, including those in the Middle East, said you undermine negotiations. So I think Trump's intervention was vital to this happening, and I'd like to see the Labour Party recognise that.
Paul?
Well, I mean, I think the US has been absolutely fundamental to the prosecution of the war. I mean, it's been US arms, it's been US armaments that have been supplying the IDF, which has been used in strikes in Gaza. I find it very hard to call anybody who's selling weapons to the IDF, as the IDF has conducted its way the way it has in Gaza, a hero at all. I think he could have ended that war much earlier. I think there could have been much more robust steps by him and actually by the UK government as well. This is a conflict that has gone on way too long, could have been ended much earlier if the powers that be in the UK and the US had properly used the levers of power they actually had to end this war. And it's a tragedy, an absolute tragedy, a horror to see that this war has taken so long to conclude.
I'm shaking my head because I think what Layla misunderstands is some of the geographic world politics that have been at play. Recognising Palestine and doing that in cooperation with Canada and France and others at the UN was important, an absolutely important point to bringing some of those other Middle Eastern partners to the table that are now backing the peace.
Let Layla answer that.
They were always at the table. Emily, do you really think?
I don't think you understand the situation.
You don't think I understand, and you obviously don't. When President Rubio and the US ambassador to Israel says that Bridget Phillipson, who said that you played a part, was delusional, you think I'm the one that doesn't understand. What they don't need.
Have you seen the latest American statement about the role Britain has played?
Let Emily answer that.
Yeah, have you seen the latest American statement about the role that Britain and others in Europe have played? In fact, they've gone back on that. And I appreciate that today is about Trump and we'll give him his kudos. And I'm not, I'm a woman. I'm used to giving men,
It's not about women. It's not about you. It's about peace in the Middle East.
Let me finish. It is about peace in the Middle East.
I wish it had happened earlier. Let's just look at those tweets, because you've both referred to them. Emily, you've both referred to the tweets. Let's have a look at them. This is because the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, said that the UK government had been involved in diplomatic efforts to secure a ceasefire. Ambassador Mike Huckabee then said, I assure you she's delusional. She can thank Donald Trump any time, just to set the record straight. But then, as you say, there has been another tweet. This is from President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, saying that he wanted to recognise the incredible input and tireless efforts, particularly of the National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell. So, Layla, he is saying that there has been some involvement by the British.
There has been some involvement, but I don't credit this government for bringing about peace. I credit President Trump and those at the negotiating table. And I think everyone at that table recognised that unilaterally recognising the Palestinian state without any conditions, without any borders, without any conditions whatsoever for Hamas to demilitarise, to de-arm and to recognise Israel as a country and the right to exist was wrong. And it actually hindered negotiations. And they need to recognise that and apologise.
Paul, I want to show all of you these pictures, which is Tony Blair, the former, of course, Labour Prime Minister. These are pictures of him arriving in Sharm el-Sheikh. That's where we were speaking to Hugo from. He's turned up there and is due to have a role in the so-called Board of Peace, which is said to be a post-war transitional authority in Gaza. What do you make, Paul, of the possibility of him being involved?
I think, like a lot of people, a little bit horrified by the idea that a man who's responsible for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan is now sitting on a board of peace. I think that's really taking the mickey. It does, I think, reflect the extent to which Tony Blair exercises an influence over this government and his institute in particular. which is lavishly funded by people like Larry Ellison, and has effectively been writing quite a substantial amount of Labour policy, which it is adopting. And I think a lot of Britons, a lot of people in this country, when they voted for the Labour Party back in 2024, I'm sure they weren't thinking to themselves they were voting for a Labour Party that would push forward people like Peter Mandelson or Tony Blair to represent our interests around the world.
Layla, do you think he should have a role, Tony Blair?
I don't really have an opinion on whether Tony Blair should have a role. I don't think he should. But if he's vital to the success of a peace board, then I'm for it. What I do think that it's a long journey to success, and what we have to recognise, this is the beginning of a long, painful journey. We need the disarmament of Hamas. Palestine needs leadership that recognises Israel's right to exist, and they need a leadership that's not an armed militia, and they haven't had that in decades. And I think that is much more vital than any board of peace that can come about, and that is going to be the real test of this peace agreement. OK, I just want to bring in Chris Philp, who's joined us, the Shadow Home Secretary. We've got some pictures, I think, of Keir Starmer also in Egypt. He's there with Emmanuel Macron and other world leaders. You and Priti Patel, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, have said that he shouldn't be there. Why shouldn't he be there?
Well, he ought to really be here in the UK, in Parliament, answering questions about the apparent cover-up of the collapse of the China
we are about to talk
spying
about.
prosecution. And as both the Secretary of State, the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and the American ambassador to Israel, Ambassador Huckabee, have both said that the UK didn't really have anything to do with making this peace deal happen. It does seem a little bit cheeky. He's over there trying to bag some credit instead of answering questions
actually said that
in Parliament.
They have had a role to
play.
play.
I saw the Witkoff tweet. That was, I guess, an attempt to save Jonathan Powell's career, which is hanging by a thread. But I think I'll go with what the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and Ambassador Huckabee have both said.
But do you really think that the Prime Minister shouldn't be there, even though we've got the leaders of various other countries, including France, Spain, Germany, they're all there? Why on earth shouldn't Keir Starmer be there?
Well, he has questions to answer in Parliament about our national security, which I know we're going to talk about in a moment. He needs to be in Parliament answering those questions.
OK, well, let's talk about that, because pressure is mounting on the Prime Minister to answer questions about all of this. This is the collapsed case against two men, Christopher Cash and Christopher Berry. They denied any wrongdoing. The case against them, they were accused of spying for China. The case against them has collapsed, and our chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman, joins us now, and he can fill us in on the background to this case, Henry, because it's been rumbling on, hasn't it? But it really is coming to the fore now, especially because Parliament has returned today.
Yeah, that's right, Vicky. The case was meant to begin in court just a couple of weeks ago, and very shortly before it was due to begin, the Crown Prosecution Service said they no longer wanted to continue with the prosecution. Why? Well, that is in dispute. The Director of Public Prosecution, Stephen Parkinson, who runs the CPS, wrote to MPs last week saying that the reason that the CPS dropped the case was that the government was not willing to say in court that it regarded China as a national security threat, despite the CPS trying to get that evidence from the government repeatedly. Well, the government, and especially Keir Starmer, who of course himself used to run the CPS, is saying that that's not the right test, that the right test is what the Conservative government of the time was willing to say at the time of the alleged offences which the two men deny. So that's 2022, 2023. Those two positions are not reconcilable. So, you know, one or the other, I think, is going to have to demonstrate that their position of what the legal situation here is the right one. But then there are all sorts of other questions under the bonnet being asked about who knew what when, who in government was involved in the discussions with the CPS about what evidence the government was willing to provide. The government is adamant that neither ministers nor Jonathan Powell, the National Security Advisor, determined what evidence the government was willing to provide. But look, one thing that has changed, as you say, Vicky, is that today Parliament is back. We're expecting the government to give its own account before Parliament, before MPs, of what went on here, and certainly they are facing a lot of scrutiny on this. OK, Henry, thank you very much for that update. And Chris, so that is one of the questions here that the government is posing to you, saying it was the previous Conservative government that actually made their judgment about China, and that's what's relevant.
Well, that argument is nonsense and grossly misleading for two reasons. Firstly, the previous Conservative government did talk about China as a threat to national security. Tom Tugendhat, the then Security Minister, said it in Parliament on April the 14th, 2024. both integrated reviews in 2021 and 2023 described China as a threat. The Director General of MI5, Ken McCallum, described China having engaged on espionage on an epic scale, to use his words, and responding to the Intelligence and Security Committee report in 2023. The previous government agreed with their assessment about the threat China posed. But that actually, what the last government said publicly, actually isn't the legal test. The legal test is whether a jury believe or don't believe that China at the time was a threat to national security. And I can tell you from my own time in government then, I was, for example, technology minister for much of the period concerned. There are numerous documents in government. Obviously, I can't talk about the details, but they demonstrate very clearly China was a threat to our national security. I think Tom Tugendhat, the then security minister, said the same. And what the Labour government have done is they have chosen not to disclose those documents to the Crown Prosecution Service. That has caused the trial to collapse. And they've done
why
that.
are you suggesting that they've done this?
Well, they've quite clearly done it. And by the way, the Chinese...
But why, what are you saying their motivation
They've done
is,
it
allegedly?
clearly because the government has got the country into a massive financial mess, and they want to try and get closer trade links with China to bail us out of the economic mess Labour's created, and they're willing to sacrifice national security to do that, whether it's collapsing this China spy case or giving consent to the embassy, which is going to be a base for espionage, which they're about to do.
OK, well,
And that is a deliberate and completely wrong choice they've made, and now they're trying to cover it up. First of all, on September the 15th, I replied to a statement by the current security minister when he said, the government had no idea what was going on. We're totally oblivious. It's a complete surprise. It's all down to the Crown Prosecution Service. Now the Director of Public Prosecution has written 3 public letters in which he says that's not the case, and the CPS spent months chasing the government, the Labour government, for evidence which the Labour government refused to provide.
So, Emily, it's very unusual, isn't it, that the head of the CPS has intervened in this way publicly?
It is unusual. What worries me, I chair a group of cross-party MPs, APPG on Hong Kong. And what I'm seeing in terms of people from Hong Kong living in Milton Keynes and across the country is this transnational repression. Now, I know that both Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves raised that at the highest level in China. We do need to understand how we have a relationship with China that doesn't allow this kind of activity, but also recognises the economic links it already has in the UK. So how do we have a relationship with them? I don't know the details about this case, nor would it be appropriate for me.
Whose fault is it that this is?
I wouldn't know. But
CPS do.
We'll hear more today in the statement. I'll be in the chamber for the statement. But what I do know is some of the activity of China at the moment on UK soil against some of my own constituents who are from Hong Kong. And that needs to stop. And we need to call that out at the absolute highest level.
Leila?
To be honest, we have a government that will arrest you for a tweet. But if you're a hostile Chinese spy, they'll look the other way. And this is the problem when we have a government that fears offending China more than it fears betraying Britain. Don't forget that this was Jonathan Powell, the National Security Advisor, is part of the 48 Group Club, which acts like a soft liaison trade group, but actually courts UK elites, ministers, advisors, to push Chinese interests. So it blurs the line between infiltration and diplomacy. And Jonathan Powell is part of that. And don't forget, Jonathan Powell also pushed for us to give the Chagos Islands away to a Chinese ally. And just quickly, the actual facts of the matter is that Keir Starmer said that China was not designated a national security at the time of the alleged offence. MI5 and MI6 have said it was. The 2025 National Security Protocol or policy deems it a national security. So one has to ask, why isn't the government protecting national interests? You can't bow to Beijing.
Can you respond to that?
Yeah, well, let's respond. We need to have this discussion about what China is doing. You're right, those statements are out there. I don't know why the CPS couldn't use those statements and those designations and take evidence from MI5.
Because you need a witness. You can't present in court. You can't present evidence without a witness presenting it.
You can have written evidence.
Yes, but that needs to come from a witness statement.
I just
want to bring in Paul here. Do you think the government is worried about offending China?
I think it's difficult to know. We don't, and that's the problem that we have. And I think as the non-politician on this panel, as just an ordinary citizen, a journalist, I think the problem that we have here is a total and fundamental lack of transparency of what's actually happened. I think we can't, until we know what's actually happened, we can't make a judgment. And I think there is a tendency, it's been a tendency of every government, but a tendency of this government in particular, to not be candid about the way it's making decisions, not being candid about its intentions in government, both before its election and thereafter. And I think that as citizens, we demand transparency. It is the absolute heart of good governance that you have, that citizens deserve to know what decisions are being made, when, by whom. And I don't see any reason why, besides for maybe some minor redactions for national security, those sort of documents can't be made public to us, because that is the heart of
You
good
need a
government.
witness to present those documents. Basically, Keir Starmer saying it is fine for a hostile state to come and spy on our soil.
Well, let's just talk about
you cannot bow to Beijing and represent Britain. You've got
Emily,
to pick.
do you want to quickly
and it's
answer
the
that?
government
I
combination.
don't think we do bow to Beijing, and
Well,
I think we've got. Layla's got a great slogans, but actually, I think what we need to look
Slogans,
at.
it's the truth.
Chris, let me
Well,
just bring in
two points. First of all, the government clearly is bound to Beijing on the intended consent for the Chinese super embassy.
Yeah, so let's just look at this headline,
and
just
then,
to explain to people. This is Times headline. China assured of super embassy planning progress under Labour. Why shouldn't they get that?
Well, because it's a threat to national security, because it sits on top of a critical fibre optic cable network, and because it will be used as a base for espionage. It was our position in government that it shouldn't be granted. Labour has been threatened by Beijing and they've backed down. And the government were also threatened, the Labour government were also threatened on this spying case. And just as Layla says, this now gives the green light to China and others to spy at will. But look, I think your question, from a journalist point of view, about transparency is important. The question now is who in government took this decision to deliberately withhold evidence. Fingers are pointing at Jonathan Powell, the politically appointed national security advisor. Many sources have reported to journalists he was integrally involved. There was a very weaselly statement on this on Laura Kuenssberg's programme yesterday by Bridget Phillipson, which left a lot of wiggle room. Were ministers aware? Was Keir Starmer aware of this case? These are all unanswered questions, and I think this afternoon Jonathan Powell's position in government is hanging by a thread.
Well, there's going to be, as you say, a statement in the House of Commons about all of that. Can I just quickly ask you, Emily, do you think that the super embassy should be allowed?
I think they should have an embassy. I'm not particularly keen on the super embassy. Because of exactly what I was talking about in terms of the actions that we're seeing against the Hong Kong community here in the UK. If there are rules against espionage, there are rules against this, we need to be absolutely firm that any kind of building of an embassy cannot be about supporting those efforts, both here in the UK and in Europe more widely.
Paul, do you think they should get the super embassy?
I mean, I'm not massively across the issue, I've got to be honest, but I think we live in the real world. I think that we have to deal with China at some level. I think that actually, generally speaking, most people agree that multilateralism is better than autarky, and that if that can be done safely and it can be done in ways that China gives assurances that are carried through, I don't see a particular problem with that.
I do, because the US has warned against it. It is a national security threat. China's not a friend, China's a creditor. It has decimated our manufacturing industries. It's even creating the solar panels that we're relying on. They basically killed our manufacturing base, and they're trying to undermine us through that. I don't think they should be. The US has warned against it, and Labour somehow seem to listen more to China than to our allies.
OK. Chris Philp, thank you very much for coming in and speaking to us on that today. And we will bring more of that story following the statement this afternoon in tomorrow's programme. Thank you very much indeed. Now, let's have a look at this headline from China to Russia. This is the story that ex-Wales Reform leader Nathan Gill took bribes to make statements in favour of Russia while a member of the European Parliament. It says Farage was stunned by ex-Wales Reform leader and the fact that he took bribes. He pleaded guilty. He will be sentenced. I think it's going to happen next month. Layla, there have been a certain number of scandals around some Reform councillors, for example, issues with vetting. But, I mean, this is on a different level, isn't it? I mean, how embarrassing is this for your party?
Well, he has not been a part of Reform since 2021, and we are very clear he is a traitor to this country, and we need the full force of the law to step in. We were trailing at 1% at the time in Wales. We were never a party meant to go in government. I've never met him. So many people in Reform have never met him. And yes, he is a traitor to this country. Anyone who does that is a traitor and should be treated accordingly. And let's just put that into perspective. He has been removed from the party since 2021, unlike Labour, who cover for people who have betrayed the ministerial code, who have betrayed the country, and are pandering to China, who is Russia's #1 ally.
Nigel Farage, of course,
I would say Nigel Farage.
He
Yeah,
met Nathan
exactly.
Gill. We got
Number
pictures
one
of the
ally.
two of them together. I mean, he knew him pretty well, didn't he?
He may have knew him, but he had absolutely no idea. And if he did, I mean, Nigel
pictures of
Farage
the
is
two
the
of them
biggest.
together.
He's fought for many, many years for the sovereignty of this country and for the right to rule ourselves. If he had any inclination that Nathan Gill had any connection with Putin, he would have called it out. What accusation exactly is Labour trying to make?
I think some of Nigel Farage's statements about Russia are particularly worrying.
Like what?
How he thinks that Vladimir Putin is one of the best leaders in the world.
When has he said that recently?
It's about
I have not heard him say that. I have not heard him say that.
I would like to see more transparency about Russian money in the UK politics. And we have heard this many times before. We heard it during Brexit. We heard it during some of the Conservative things. I would like true transparency in the Reform Party, which is a PLC, in their funding. I would like to know how much
it's all on the electoral register.
No,
yes, it is. Can you prove it's not?
No, I'm
Are
asking
you making
you
an
to.
accusation that it's
No,
not?
I'm asking you
Don't make accusations.
to be transparent.
Don't make such.
I'm asking you for
we
transparency.
are very You know what we need transparency on? Why are you cozying up to
Let
Russia's...
Layla answer that. Let Layla answer that.
Why are you cozying up?
You think I'm cozying to Russians?
Yeah, why is your party cozying up to China, which is Russia's #1 ally? Can you answer that?
We're not.
You are. You're letting spies, hostile spies, get away with it. You won't even dare to testify against China.
And I think we've taken a very robust line against Russia. And in terms of the war in Ukraine,
and China are two of the
who
same
has been
coin.
weak on that, it has been reformed.
No, it hasn't.
Layla, can I? Okay, I'm going to make it slightly more parochial for a moment. I just want to have a look at this headline in the Times. 8 reform UK councils are likely to raise tax next year. Now, we do know that your party, Nigel Farage, of course, promised to cut waste and save a lot of money, sent people into some of the councils that you now run. Actually, it turns out it's been much more difficult than you thought. You're actually going to be putting up council tax.
So none of the councils have said that they're going to put up council tax. This is all rumours from the press.
So they're not going to?
I don't know. That's their decision.
Okay.
There has been no statement and there has been no clear decision on that. What I can tell you is across 12 councils, in about 5 months, we've cut £100 million worth of waste. Now, imagine if we won. Imagine that kind of cutting of waste nationally. We're the only party that's talking about cutting spending as opposed to raising taxes. And you've seen that. In Derbyshire Council, 26,000 potholes were reduced to 2,000 in 5 months. 75% of complaints about tyres, damaged tyres, have gone down to zero.
You
can't guarantee that council tax.
I'm not running the council. I can't guarantee that council tax. They have not said anything either way. But we said that we were going to cut waste, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Paul?
I just think this discussion about waste is just generally misleading. We've had 14 years of Tory austerity, which has cut spending to the absolute bone. We have a real issue with the healthcare provision. Was certainly care provision is being covered by local government, which is incredibly expensive. And I worry that when I hear this talk about waste, that it's a pipe dream to talk about that there's an enormous amount of waste. I was thinking during the election last year, Paul Johnson from the IFS said, look, it's been cut to the absolute bone. If you cut any more, you're going into the most basic services that you can no longer provide. He was talking about, for example, if you cut any more from the education budget, you're looking at starting to do things like having to get people to pay to take their A-levels. That's the level of the funding crisis that was inherited.
Layla, do you agree there's nowhere to...
I don't agree at all. For instance, I was a senior Crown prosecutor. I was a senior Crown prosecutor in this. I'm not running the council. I was a senior Crown prosecutor in the CPS, and we had a huge sustainability department. I was a senior Crown prosecutor, and they were earning double the amount I was. We are lawyers with computers. We do not need a sustainability department. We did have a DEI department. We do not need these. And these are costing the taxpayer billions of pounds. Yes, of course. But of course, Labour are not interested because you don't respect the taxpayer. You don't respect the taxpayer, how hard they work to pay their taxes.
Layla, can you just let Emily answer that point?
So first of all, I used to run a council. So let me tell you about what is actually in councils. There's no money after 14 years of austerity. And in fact, that's backed up by your Doge expert that went into council and said exactly the same
I actually have a list of things
the
we've
money that you're talking about, fixing potholes, is actually money from the Labour government that's just been given to councils. It is. Let me finish. You had a chance. So you're talking about actually cutting real services. You're talking about cutting children's services. You're talking about cutting libraries. You're talking about cutting Sure Start centres, which are now children's centres. I know what it's like. You're saying you haven't run a council. I'm telling you what it's like to run a council.
Thank you.
Okay, because I have that experience. No, but you're saying you don't know. So I'm trying to tell you what it is like, the real experience on the ground. And when you talk about cutting sustainability and DEI, it's nice to kind of dress things up like that. But the reality is there is not loads of money that goes into it. And the money that does go into it, show me the numbers.
I don't have the numbers, but I know.
I mean, this is just like
let Layla
one
come back on that. You're talking about diversity programmes.
Yeah, but let me just tell you, I have a list here of what Kent has cut. 2.5 million saved from home to school transport budget by careful forward planning. 5.5 million saved after negotiating a discount on the 50 million we paid off from long-term debt. 206,000. And the list I've got, I don't want to bore you all.
So you've saved money from interest rates coming down.
7.5 million saved. 7.5 million saved by 2030 by scrapping the transitioning of KCC vehicles fleet to electric vehicles. 14 million saved by staying put in Sessions House and scrapping proposed renovation of Move Across to Invicta House.
Well,
there are savings to be made there.
She's obviously run a council.
Every little counts.
So absolutely, we can always look at savings. I have to ask, when you're not going to spend on capital, which would have been your cars, what are you going to end up spending in revenue? Have you even lost that? You can present those numbers in that way, but the reality is you always have to look long term. Now councils actually have 3-year budgets. That's going to make it much, much easier to get rid of the waste. And this is where there is waste, is when you're recommissioning every year because you don't know what your budget is the following year. That is true waste. So we'll get some savings that way. But the cost of social care is going up. The cost of children's social care is going up. The number of children that need SEND assessments and EHCPs is going up. There are costs that are going up. And therefore, the councils need to be able to provide those services because, as you said, the most important task for a council is providing services for its citizens and its communities. And it is best at determining that. And if reform councils do put up money, put up council tax, I'm not going to turn around and say that was the wrong thing to do if they can show me they're using that money for their communities. My worry is they're not actually understanding the needs of their communities.
Is that a bit like how national government's not understanding the needs of the country by putting up taxes and spending it on things that real people don't care about? 13.3 billion in foreign green aid while you raise taxes on everyone.
Is that a bit like?
We will come back. This is an ongoing issue.
I'm very happy to talk about that.
I would like to see the government prioritise.
Okay. I want to know what viewers think of this issue because I'm sure they have equally strong views. So if you do, the details are on the screen now. You can get in touch with us about what's happening in your local council. But now we're going to speak to Lindsay Bew, who is at the SNP conference, and the leader of the SNP, John Swinney, is speaking later on this afternoon. What's he likely to say, Lindsay?
Hi, Vicky. Yes, we're expecting John Swinney on stage here at the conference to make his closing speech to SNP members and to delegates in a couple of hours' time. And it's a crucial moment for the First Minister and the SNP leader as he looks ahead to next year's Holyrood election. So that will be a big focus of what he will want to talk about today. And it comes after, at the weekend, he persuaded the members to back his plan for his strategy on achieving a second independence referendum. They have agreed that the party will declare a mandate for a second referendum if the SNP wins a majority of seats in the election next year. Now, that is a very tall order indeed. They have only ever achieved that once before, back in 2011. So the First Minister thinks, his advisors think, the party think that there is a possible route to doing that again next year. And they think that for a couple of reasons, really. One of those is the slump in the polls for Labour off the back of the general election. The other is rising support for Reform UK in polling here in Scotland. They think that Reform UK could fracture the support around the unionist parties here, and that could be to their advantage. So there will be a focus on that in Mr Swinney's speech this afternoon as well. He is going to talk about revulsion, as he sees it, in this race to the right at Westminster, as he puts it, leading to greater support for his own party and for the independence movement more broadly. He will talk about how he believes that Labour has let people down when it comes to things like the cost of living and rising energy prices, and he will make the case that Scotland could get a fresh start, as he puts it, if it were to vote for the SNP next year and then manage to achieve an independence referendum and back independence ultimately.
OK, Lindsay Bewes, thank you very much indeed. And tomorrow on our programme, we will have Stephen Flynn, who is the SNP's Westminster leader. Now, Paul, I want to speak to you about a book that you have written. It's called The Fraud, Keir Starmer, Morgan McSweeney and the Crisis of British Democracy. Morgan McSweeney, of course, is the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. Very close to the Prime Minister. There's a picture of him there, and a lot of it focuses on the relationship between the two men. What are just some of the claims that are in this book?
Well, I mean, the book is absolutely chock full of, I think, pretty scandalous revelations about the nature of this Labour government, about the way in which this Labour government achieved power, and in particular way, the faction around Morgan McSweeney, a pretty small, censorious, authoritarian faction, used a campaign of misdirection funded with donations that weren't reported as required by law to effectively seize a party and transform it from within, to turn it into something that the vast majority of Labour members probably find quite disturbing.
This was at the time when Jeremy Corbyn was leader.
So between 2017 and 2020, Morgan McSweeney ran an organisation called Labour Together, which took in £740,000 in donations, which it failed to report. Now, that's not an opinion. That is cold, hard fact.
Yeah, the Electoral Commission have fined...
Exactly.
They fined Labour Together £14,250 for failing to declare those donations.
In 2021.
In 2021. And that money is not just incidental. This is not incidental to the story. That was money that was then used to fundamentally transform our politics. Because on the one hand, Morgan McSweeney was using that money to pay for polling, to incubate the leadership of Keir Starmer. At the same time, he was running what I think is a rather despicable campaign, entirely secret, without any disclosure at all in the public, destroying the Labour Party from within to make sure that the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn couldn't win the 2019 general election, or with a pot of money that's not being declared. Now, I raise issues with that because I don't think that's even though the Electoral Commission has made a finding there, I don't feel that story is over, because I have serious questions, serious reservations about whether those donations were not reported purposefully. And in fact, I make an argument in my book.
Because Morgan McSweeney, they say that Labour Together have said that they were an administrative error.
Which on the face of the evidence really makes no sense to me. And I'll give you an example, if I may. Was back in 2023, I submitted a Freedom of Information request to the Electoral Commission, and they provided me with all the correspondence between Mr. Morgan McSweeney and the Electoral Commission. And it shows that in November 2017, Morgan McSweeney called the Electoral Commission and said, I don't think we should report donations. I don't want to report donations. We're not a campaigning organisation. And the Electoral Commission wrote back to him on multiple occasions and said, no, you have an absolute duty to report donations. It's absolutely clear that Morgan McSweeney was told over the course of a number of months of his duty to report donations and how to report those donations. We also know that Morgan McSweeney was going around...
I just want to bring Emily in before we go on to... because there's a lot of claims in there.
Sure.
I mean, what do you make of this? This idea that it was a secretive organisation that was campaigning really to destroy Jeremy Corbyn. That's what you're suggesting.
So, I mean, it wasn't much of a secretive organisation. Everybody knew about it at the time.
That's not true.
I was a member. I wasn't affiliated. No, I was a member of the Labour Party.
Okay, so did you know what Labour Together was doing behind the scenes?
No, but I knew about them.
So it was secretive.
I also knew about there were different organisations around. Unions 21 was around.
Okay, but
still
what did you
then.
think Labour Together was doing?
We had the Labour left.
What do you think Labour Together was doing between 2017 and 2020? So what did you know about?
What I knew about was I had a party that I had supported.
That's not the question I'm asking.
Hang on, you're asking me what my recollection in 2017 was.
Of what Labour Together was doing.
I knew of them. That's all I knew.
Okay.
I wasn't involved with them. But what I did know was my party was spiralling down. It had anti-Semitism happening. It had intolerance of any view that wasn't within the Corbyn little sphere. It was not nice to be a member of the party at the time, and it was unelectable. And I worked my butt off locally in Milton Keynes, making sure that we had policies in Milton Keynes so we could lead the council and then hopefully prepare for government, which we've now done.
Okay.
Does that?
So
you're
what you're
asking me to
telling me is that
comment
the
on something?
organisation that delivered you Keir Starmer, your leader, who said repeatedly that they actually were behind Keir Starmer's leadership campaign, it doesn't disturb you at all that they were running a 2.5-year campaign to make sure the Labour Party lost under Jeremy Corbyn, a Labour Party that you were part of. You don't think that's a problem?
So we are used to having those campaigns in the Labour Party. Momentum, again, that was an organisation that was set up to bring Jeremy Corbyn to power.
Who were declaring publicly their funding, they were declaring with the law and what they were doing,
this is where,
and Labour Together was not.
This is where I agree with you. Everyone should declare publicly their funding. And we need more transparency in campaign finance. And so it's not just my challenge to reform and not just my challenge to Labour. We have a huge gap in our electoral system where electoral law does not apply to social media and to online platforms. And we need to be closing that. Neither Electoral Commission has no responsibility for the online space, and the Online Safety Act has no responsibility for electoral law. And we need to close that. I think, absolutely. I think transparency and closing that loop is so important.
You have to act like it's important. Because what you have right now is a Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister who broke the law. We know he broke the law. He's found guilty of breaking the law. And nobody seems in the Labour Party to care about that. At the same time, Labour Together's directors were Steve Reid, a Cabinet Minister, Lisa Nandy, a Cabinet Minister. That organisation broke the law for 2.5 years. Why do you not care about that fact?
I care that they were investigated twice and they paid what they owed, and there should have been transparency right from the start.
And there isn't transparency.
So, Paul, just to say that the Electoral Commission in September announced it would not be reopening its investigation into Labour Together. They said it had thoroughly reviewed this information and found no evidence of any other potential offences. But can I just broaden this to ask about Keir Starmer's leadership and the direction of the party? Do you feel, he stayed in Jeremy Corbyn's cabinet, didn't he? He was supportive in that sense. I mean, what do you say about the way he has moved the party now? Do you think he has moved the party?
Oh, he's fundamentally transformed the party. He's made it unrecognisable. And he will.
Some would say he made it electable.
Well, electable on 33% of the vote. He is now the least popular Prime Minister since polling began.
A huge majority,
yes,
which,
and of course
Jeremy Corbyn
Corbyn
wasn't able to achieve.
Sure. And I think that if he had been honest with the electorate about his intentions, about how he's going to run his government, if the manifesto reflected anything what the government has actually been like, it would have been a much smaller majority. In the same way that if he was honest about his intentions and about his approach in 2020, there's absolutely no way he would have been elected Labour leader, because he presented himself as a unifying socialist, eco-socialist Corbyn inheritor. And literally as soon as he won that election, all of the policies that he promised, all the pledges he made dropped. And in fact, I should say that my publisher said to me, it would be great if you could put together a spreadsheet or a table of every single pledge or promise that Keir Starmer made in those 4 months and whether they were broken. I did so. And it was so long I couldn't put it in the book.
Well, Emily, can you just respond to that? Because lots of people have made this point that Keir Starmer stood as leader on one manifesto, if you like, and then just ditched all those policies.
So, first of all, I'd just like to say things were not rosy under the Corbyn years. They really weren't. And we shouldn't pretend that the Labour Party was super wonderful at that point and what's happened since has destroyed it. It was not a healthy organisation at that point.
But was Keir Starmer deceitful in the way he got to the leadership?
I think there are two things that happen. I think one, yes, probably we are in the process of saying these were the policies that he said and then those changed. Absolutely. How much of that changed because he thought that he could only get elected by saying it, or how much is it because actually a lot of the world changed in that time? Things absolutely fundamentally changed in that time.
Leila, just have a word, because I want to bring you on this very quickly before the end of the programme.
They might have won an election and become electable, but they're not governable. They're not governing. They're bringing in things that were never in the manifesto through the back door, the online safety bill and the digital ID.
That was passed under the last government.
No, it was brought in under you. It was written by them, but you could have scrapped it. No Parliament is bound by the previous Parliament. Yet the digital ID, no one wants that. There is a huge public outcry against it. So he is doing everything that was not in the manifesto. He's doing the opposite. So I think actually he is duplicitous, and I think he's a bit of an opportunist, and he jumps at whatever story will get him elected.
Right, I think this one will, go on after we come off air, but that is all for today. I will be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and iPlayer.